We are live.
All right, welcome everybody. For you individuals who are just joining us on YouTube, again, there is no handout for this class. We are taking questions from individuals who had submitted their questions prior to this class. So let's get started. We're going to get started a little bit early here, 2 minutes in. Welcome everybody to today's panel discussion or question and answer session on Ask Your United States and Canada Research Questions. This class is being presented by the Family History Library U.S.-Canada team, and we are glad that you could join us. But before we get started, as always, we have a few housekeeping items to pass on to you. So this class is being live streamed. You will be able to review a recording of this on the FamilySearch YouTube channel. Note, however, that the recording will only be available for a limited time. Today, we will be answering questions about the United States and Canadian research. Most of the questions we will be answering were submitted ahead of time by registered attendees. If you have time at the end of the class, we may be able to answer a few additional questions. If you have a question, please post in the chat on Zoom or comments on YouTube. Jacqueline has just posted in the chat box a link for those forms for your questions and answers for next time. Also, too, for you folks who have submitted questions, we may have changed them up a little bit so that your question may not seem like to be the question that you submitted. Sometimes we made it a little bit more shorter so that we condensed it a little bit. But it's still the same question. If you are on Zoom and would like to have your questions and comments seen by everyone, please make sure your chat messages are set to panelists and attendees. That is a little box down at the bottom of the chat box. It says make sure you have that selected for all panelists and attendees. If you need help with a specific research problem in your family, and this is very, very important, we encourage you to sign up to meet one-on-one with one of our research specialists in a virtual consultation. You can do that by going to the Family History Library's website or search virtual research strategy sessions on the FamilySearch wiki. And again, those in the chat box has been posted the link for those virtual sessions. Again, these are free, don't have to pay for them, and we take all questions on that one. In 2021, the U.S. and Canada team will be presenting classes on Thursdays at 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time, usually the first and third Thursdays of the month. The next class, which will be taught by the Family History Library, will be next Tuesday, the research process, research help and searching records on FamilySearch. That's on Tuesday, June the 1st, 2021 at 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. The next class taught by the U.S. and Canada team will be Forgotten Wives, Mothers, and Old Maids, Tracing Women in U.S. Research, and that will be taught on Thursday.
June 3rd. Sorry.
The 3rd?
I went and researched.
Yeah, that'll be taught on next Thursday is that next Thursday? Yeah, next Thursday on the 3rd at 10 a.m. So let's introduce our panelists here really quick. We're gonna just we have Jacqueline. Jacqueline is wave Jacqueline. Jacqueline is our basically she handles a lot of Canadian questions. All these folks though are with the U.S. and Canada team. But you're accredited, right? Yeah. You have an AG.
Not yet. I'm working on it.
Oh, okay.
In the process.
Okay. Then we have Beth. Beth handles a lot of our DNA questions. She has been with the U.S. and Canada for a number of years now. How long?
15 years.
15 years, okay. We have Jason Harrison, who is the manager of the U.S. and Canada and VIP teams, and he does book lookups. But been at the library for quite a long time as well. Does a lot of New England research. We have Rachel. Rachel is one of our newest folks online or on board in our unit. She does a lot of Canadian research, particularly the Atlantic provinces. And no, she has not found any treasure on Oak Island yet. So there you go. Then we have Lynn Rasmussen, who handles U.S. and Canada as well, Southern States research, and African American, Native American research as well. And then we have Julia. Julia, who is, now I know Julia is accredited. What are you accredited in, Julia?
The Gulf South.
Oh, the Southern States as well. Southern States as well. And then there's me. And I'm retiring in September. And that's all I'll say about that. So let's get started here. Let me pull up the questions that we have and that we have gathered over the years. Okay, question number one for you folks today. Again, real quick, there is no handout for this class. So we're just going to be taking these questions today. So our first question here that is up on the board is, why would someone who was Black leave Canada for St. Louis, Missouri around 1870? Why would someone who was Black leave Canada for St. Louis, Missouri around 1870? Let's see here, Lynn. Well, we'll start with Lynn. Lynn, do you want to take that question first?
There, let me unmute there.
Unmute.
Yeah, that is a very good question, and it has a lot of elements to it. We don't know everything about this person. Everything wasn't in the question, but we did know he was from Montreal and that he was born there. So he didn't recently come to Canada, and but his parents may have anyway. You want to make sure that you've done a complete census search. In the United States, you've also got a 51 and a 61 Canada census that might help. And once you have a complete census search done, you will probably get some clues. Is he there because he's around family? You'll be able to pick up on some of those kind of things. That would be probably my theory as to why he might make a move like that. City directories could help you with his occupation. Perhaps there's a reason there that he made that kind of a move. You're not going to find any kind of immigration records in this time period, so that's not going to be of any help. Jacqueline, was there a community of escaped slaves in Montreal that he might have been a part of, or his parents might have been a part of?
So, I mean, most of the escaped slaves from like the Underground Railroad actually ended up in Upper Canada, so like modern day Ontario. They usually settled in that southern border. There were still some that went further, so that could be a possibility, but I mean, most likely it's not related to it. But you never know. You could always do more research on that. And I think there's different records through the Quebec archives and the LAC archives as well. Well, that's redundant. Through the LAC that you can look up and see if they have any more records on that.
Any other thoughts?
Probably using just a lot of the standard sources, church records, the city directories we mentioned, a history of what's going on with the Black communities in St. Louis that might draw him there, any particular group there that he would connect with. And you should be able to pick that up in some of the other records that you're finding as you complete your search on him in the United States. We do have a wiki page, African American Immigration to Canada, that could be helpful also. So we've kind of covered question 1 and 2 here.
I also think too that he might have gone to, and any of you other folks on the panel can answer and join in. I also think that he probably, for that time frame, I think he would be going there looking for family, or there might be some family connections there.
Yeah, I kind of think that too.
Makes the most
If he's looking for work, he could go, if he's up in Canada, he could go anywhere for work. Rochester, Detroit, Cleveland, those large cities. St. Louis being in the middle of the United States, that's quite a trek for that time period. So to be looking for work, I would think there's probably more than likely some kind of family members down there.
Yeah. Unless he's a river person and work in the river, he could just end up in St. Louis as he works his way down with that kind of occupation.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay.
I think it covers it.
Next question. Are there passenger lists for individuals immigrating from Ireland to New Brunswick before 1850? So we're out there in the Atlantic region there of Canada. So let's go. Rachel, can you handle that one? Take that one.
Yes. So my family, most of my ancestors are from St. John. So I have pretty good authority on telling you that you are not going to find immigration records. Unfortunately, they were very poorly kept. There was no centralized entry points the way that there are in other places like Ellis Island is what you would think of. So you're going to have to use a lot of other records to substitute for that. So the main thing is obviously vital records and things like that. Birth records actually began even before 1850. And so when they start having children in the area, that'll give you a good idea of when they arrived. Overall, the vital records coverage in New Brunswick is excellent. They also available online. You have all kinds of cemetery records, and land records are very useful for pinpointing immigration because when they start buying land, you know that they arrived there and you can see previous transactions, and it's very easy to track the family's movement. To specifically find out where they came from is going to be more difficult if you don't have immigration records. What I highly suggest is looking at the other Irish immigrants who might be living around them, looking for others with the same surname in the area who could be relatives that they moved to be close to, or just large bunches of immigrants. And if you can figure out where a lot of them originated from, there's a good chance. It was very common for people to want to immigrate. If they're coming to a brand new country, they want to be around people that they know that they can trust, who may have been from their home area, who they have connections with. So I would highly recommend checking those sort of things out. Our Provincial Archives of New Brunswick has so many resources available to you. I highly recommend just checking out their website and browsing around and see what's available. They have a very small collection of passenger lists. You might get lucky. Like when I say a small collection, there's 7 years worth of passenger lists scattered. So, but they also have immigration administration records and things like that. So even if you can't find your ancestors' passenger list, you can get information like influxes of Irish ancestors and things like that. And DNA can also help pinpoint where people originated from. But my biggest suggestion is to use every other record possible and create a timeline of their life. And that can help you figure out exactly when they immigrated and perhaps where they came from within Ireland.
Okay. Good. Anyone else want to throw in? Nope. All right. So yeah. So basically, Rachel, what you're saying is, as far as passenger lists, few and far between for that time frame.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Next question we have: how do I trace someone who was a child in the 1880 census and is no longer in the household in 1900, especially since we have a missing 1890 census? And I'll start this one out. Does everybody like that? Tough. I'm doing it anyhow. So unfortunately, we don't have an age for this individual, so we don't know how old they are in 1880. So it's kind of going to depend on the age a little bit. However, if they're there in the household in 1880 and not there then in 1900, there's a number of things. There's two things that basically could have happened to them. Also, I don't think we know if this is a male or a female, do we? So
I think the original question asked about a woman.
It was a female? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So if it's a female, there's basically two things that could have happened to this individual. Either they married or they died, or maybe they just left home, and maybe for that time frame, maybe there'd be a servant in another household. So one of the things I would check, of course, if they married, would be the county marriage records, to go through and see if you can pick that individual up in the county marriage records at all. Also, if the individual did die, you could check cemetery records in the area. Depending on the county may be keeping county death records for that time period. So I would check the Family History Library catalog to see if there's any county death records for that particular time period. Also, too, obituaries for the parents, since you did find them in the census records, there's the possibility that the parents might have an obituary. And the reason for the parents' obituaries, and also obituaries of the siblings, is those obituaries may mention surviving individuals and where they are living, where those surviving living individuals are living. There we go. Again, since also probate records, if you know that, since you know the names of the parents, check probate records. That may give you a list of individuals who are surviving at the time that the estate was probated, and may indicate the married names of the females. Let's see here. Okay, yeah. I would go also too with census records for mom and dad later on for the 1900 and 1910 to see how many children are living of the mother, how many children she had, and then how many are living. And also, are there any church records in the area? The church records may indicate, again, the deaths of children or the burials of children or the funerals of children. And so, yeah, marriage records. Yeah, I would go with marriage records to see if she's married. Of course, the trouble with marriage records, sometimes at that time period, they don't have female indexes or bride indexes. They just have groom indexes. So that may be a little challenging. So, but still, check the marriage records. Go for the obits of the siblings and also the parents to see if the child's mentioned anywhere in there.
One other thing you could do is do a lot more research on the siblings as well. There's always a good chance, if she did survive, that maybe she ended up living next to them or near them, or have some sort of dealings with land and with her husband in them. So not just the parents, but also the siblings, do research on.
Yeah, research. Whenever you're doing research, you want to research the whole family, not just one particular individual within that family, but you want to research the entire family. So you want to get whatever death records you can on the individuals within that family, whatever marriage records you can get a hold of, but always be researching the whole family. Okay. Anybody want to fill in on that? Jump in.
Well, I think Lynn just made a great comment, point in the comments or the chat on Zoom about the wiki, that sometimes you just want to go explore what the wiki has to offer for that county, because there might be some less known records or unique records that you've never heard of before that could help with this question as well.
Okay. Anybody else? I know some of us are a bit shy.
It's because you answered the question so well, Tim.
Oh, there you go.
We don't have anything to add to it.
Yeah.
No one on this team is shy.
All right, next question. Here we go. What sources can someone use to bridge the gap going back from 1900 to 1880? Who should I pick? Oh, I'll go. Beth, do you want to handle that one? What sources can someone use to bridge the gap going back from 1900 to 1880? Because we have that missing census in there.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. I think that's one that we all run into, is you kind of get to that point where you're like, especially somebody who married maybe in 1881 and then they're, or they were born in 1881, married by 1900. How do you find parents? But I think one of the things that's really easy with this specific question is that we kind of assume that If there's no 1890 census, there's no other records. But I mean, there's so many US records, and the 1890 census is just one missing record set. So there's a lot of things that we can do to fill in the gap. The first thing I always recommend is that you start from the 1900 to the end of their lives and really fill in that time period too. So you want to get, the census records for, 1900, 10, 20, 30, 40, and starting next year, 1950. We want to get, everything that you can about their life. Did they marry? When did they marry? Find that record, their death, the births of their children. If they're in a city, look for city directories, look for newspapers, look for anything you can find, after that point. Do they own property? Look for probate records, look for pretty much anything that you can post 1900. And then also try and look for records that fill in that time period. There are quite a few state censuses that were taken. There's the 1885, Lynn, you'll have to tell me exactly what it's called. Is it the 1895 federal census, or kind of federal census, or federally funded census?
Yeah, it was a federally funded census that the states had the option to take, but it was mandatory in the growing areas, Florida, the Dakotas, Colorado, I think, Oregon, Washington. Some of those fast growing areas have an 1885 and sometimes even an 1895 federally funded census. Other states took it because the federal government was giving them some money, but it was optional. So up in the Midwest, there's some states that have those censuses that can really be helpful. New York's got a lot of censuses that are helpful. The 1892 census for New York.
Yeah, so there's some good, there's some state and local censuses that fill in that gap. And then there's just things like, go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, sometimes there's a state, a census that's just for certain counties because the counties decide to do it. So look in the catalog under census for your county, and you might find that there was some kind of a census.
Yeah, so lots of things that can fill in that, you got the state and local censuses. If you're looking at Civil War veterans or their widows, the 1890 veteran schedule, which it's, I think, Kentucky through the end of the alphabet, those states survived. There are still some things. And then just, land records, probate records, tax court, church records, they all exist for that time period. It's not that, they burned the 1890 census and then they burned all the records that went between 1880 and 1900. There's a ton of stuff that fills that time period in. We are missing the census, but there's a lot of other records to look at, vital records. Pretty much all the other records are still there. And the same thing going before 1880. So yeah, it can sometimes be a tough gap because we are missing that one census, but don't forget about all of the other records that you can use to fill that in. So yeah, definitely a doable thing is to jump from 1880 to 1900. Can be difficult sometimes, but still, or from 1900 to 1880. But don't feel like just because one record set is missing, that means everything's missing. And there are 6,000 schedules that survived for 1890. If you want to go take a look and see what it would have offered us if it hadn't burned. But
yeah, how many records survived there for 1890? 6,000 and what? 300 and
I thought it was 6,100 and something, but
6,100 and something. Yeah, so
yeah.
There are a smattering of them in there. I was going to ask a question that's not one of the questions. I was going to throw you a curveball here, so see if you can hit it. So, so I'm. What about? And this isn't a question, but this kind of comes up quite a bit. But this isn't a question that's on our list. But what about? And I'm asking this because I over the years I know people are afraid of those census records that begin in 1840 and earlier that don't have the names of parents. So or not the names of parents, but don't have the names of everybody. They just list the name of the head of household. So what records would you guys look at in order to, build out a family for families that existed before 1850 when you don't have the whole family named?
The census records. I mean, that would be a starting point.
Right.
They're still so valuable. I think Lynn's doing a class in August on state and territorial census. No, but you're not doing pre-1840, 50, I guess, censuses. But they're
right.
We sometimes ignore them because we're like, oh, they don't have any value, but they still tell you the whole structure of the household. There are 3 girls under the age of 5, and there are 2 boys who are 5 to 10. That is just as valuable as anything else. It's a good starting point. But then don't forget your land, your probate, your court. your other records, church, military, a lot of things could be used to kind of put those families together. And just because the family started or lived pre-1850 doesn't mean that's when they died. So make sure that you're exploring the sources after 1850 as well.
Okay.
Yeah, depending on where you're at as well. You know, if you're in New England, then you may have early vital records, the town records that may help putting together families. Again, depending on time period, if you're in a major city, city directories could help you put together households. Could be another record that you might want to use.
Okay. All right, let's move on with our assigned questions. You guys can yell at me later for throwing that in, but, you know. But let's not do it online. We don't want to embarrass anybody. So when a child was born out of wedlock, how do you determine who the birth father was? Oh, let's see. This is a tough one. Julia.
Thanks, Tim.
No problem.
So this question really depends on the time period when you're looking. So if it's a really early time in the United States, court records may tell you who the father was because it was illegal to have a child out of wedlock. And a couple who did that could be fined or receive other punishments. So that's one thing that you'd want to look at is those court records. Then it's also important that you locate all of the records for the child's lifetime and see what surname that child used. It could have changed periodically. They could have gone back and forth between one surname and another, or they might have stuck with the same surname. But it's important to note that and see if it's different from the surname that the mother was using. You're also going to want to find any marriage records of the mother and see what surname she used both prior to her marriage and afterward, and see if she was using her maiden name or some other name. And then it's really possible that the child might have known who their biological father was. And in that case, they might have put that name on their Social Security application. It may have been well known enough that it was on their death certificate. So you don't want to discount those records. If you have a supposed father, then it's important that you check their probate records because that may indicate a relationship. Even a lot of times an illegitimate child would not be considered a legal heir, but in some cases, if there was a will, they could still will property to that child. And so you want to check out all of those records. You want to find out any place where a father's name might appear and look for those records. Another option, of course, is DNA, and especially those Y-DNA tests that test father to son to son to son, and can tell you the surname line. Those can be very helpful, but you need to be careful using DNA because you want to make sure that you're also checking all of the historical records that go with it. DNA by itself doesn't really tell you that much. You need to compare it to what is in the records, and sometimes if you have the right historical records, you can do targeted DNA testing to weed out possibilities or to narrow the search between a couple of different potential fathers. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to that?
Well, I was just thinking as going through this if that illegitimate child, has any siblings or whatever. Again, this depends on the time period, but if they have living siblings, ask the living siblings. Maybe they know who the biological father is. I know in one case, an individual in my wife's line, he had two families secretly, and this wasn't a polygamist type of situation either. He had two separate families. And eventually the first family, I shouldn't say biological because they're all biological, but the first family knew of the second family, but they basically took an oath that they would never say anything about this second family to any of their children or anything along those lines. but eventually they, people found out about it. So ask the living individuals if they know who, again, depending on the time period, ask the living individuals if they know who the father might be.
Yeah, and you never know what you might find in regular records too. I have one census for one of my ancestors who was living with a woman and a bunch of children, and they were all listed as illegitimate children of him on the census record. The relationship actually said illegitimate son, illegitimate daughter. And so that was obviously a good proof that he was their father, their biological father.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you never know what gems you'll find in those historical records.
There you go. Yeah, look at the records. All right. Anybody want to add anything else to that? Okay. Moving on. Next question. In the chat box too, real quick, I noticed that they mentioned over here, I don't know who posted this, but sometimes the mother now it just blipped off my screen. Daggone it. But they mentioned though that sometimes the mother may have snuck in the name of the father into the middle name, the surname of the father into the middle name of the child. So I like that. I like that. They did that a lot back in the days of using surnames as middle names. Okay, how do you find the hometown of an immigrant ancestor? I'll start this one, and then you guys can join in. So again, this is another question that it really depends on the time period. If they came over to the colonies, there's not going to be too many passenger lists out there for that time period. If they came over after 1820, even those early time period passenger lists don't give you a whole heck of a lot of information. If they came, what do you think, guys, around 1900 when they started putting towns on
1907.
When was it?
I think about 1907.
1907. Okay. If they came in that time frame, then passenger lists would be a good way to go. Sometimes on census records, we mentioned state census records earlier. I know in one of the state census records in New York, there was an Irish census taker, and this would have been in upstate New York, but he put the counties on the New York State Census record where these individuals came from who were Irish on the state census record. So check your census records. Even on the federal census, I see a lot of times with the German individuals, they may put the state in Germany where they came from. Naturalization records, again, depending on the time period. Naturalization records after 1906 are a lot better giving information than the ones prior to 1906. But that doesn't mean you don't look at those naturalization papers from 1906 because you don't know what the clerk's going to put on. So naturalization records would be another way to go. Newspapers, obituaries may give you information as far as where the immigrant came from. Church records. I know in my own research, I had a German individual who died in 1900 in Reading, Pennsylvania. I'm going to mention Reading. I got to mention Reading in here. The church record in his funeral record for that church, it gave me the state in Germany where he came from. And so with that information, he happened to come from a state in Germany where they had migration records. And I was able to find him in those records then and pinpoint the village that he came from. Military records may indicate, again, a lot of these are based on time frame as well. Pension records may indicate. Draft registrations. I was helping someone at the library one time, and they said, I want to know the town where this individual came from. I can't remember, maybe it was Italy. We'll say Italy. So I went over to the computer where they were working, and they were looking at a family tree, an online family tree. And I said, well, let's look at the sources. And so we looked at the sources on the family tree, and they had the 1942 old man draft registration on there. And the individual had written the name of the town where they had come from. So that was an easy fix. If you're looking at colonial time period, you can start. Land records may indicate, get as many records as you can for the individual. Of course, look to see if they may have immigrated with a large group of individuals. So you're looking at your fan club, friends, associates, and neighbors, tracking where those individuals came from in the country. So if you've got a bunch of Germans living together, a bunch of Swiss individuals living together, find out where those individuals came from. And then also too, we have the Philby's list, which is passenger and immigration lists. The Philby books have been digitized, and they are not digitized, I'm sorry. They've been indexed and put onto Ancestry. So you can check those Philby books.
The note with the Philby books, they only got to about 2012's editions.
Yeah.
So you want to look at the additional volumes that have been published in the last 10 years too.
And they are called differently in Ancestry as well. They don't call them Philby's.
They call them Passenger and Immigration List, which is the name of his books.
Yeah, from 1500 to 1900, I think it is, right? Is that the title of it?
I could run and look. But we do have the books for the later years here from the last 10 volumes. We've got them here at the library.
At the library, yes. So when the library opens.
Well, we can promote our lookup service.
Oh, that's right. Yes, we do. We do have a lookup service. I forgot about that. Does somebody want to mention that? Jason?
Well, I know that just this last week, FamilySearch blog just posted that the library is now in efforts to try to help those who are unable to come to the library, who are needing a record, who have enough information to be able to pinpoint that record or do a lookup in a book, that they are taking requests for lookups, and will capture, pages from a book or a digital image of a record, and we'll send that to individuals. So check out the FamilySearch blog. I've seen several online bloggers. Eastman has also published the link and information to that. And I believe, although I have not looked, you can also access through the Family History Library homepage now has that service available.
Yeah, and Jacqueline just posted in the chat box for you folks who are online a link to that page where you can go onto FamilySearch and request record lookup, the record lookup service. Currently, the library is not opened, and we don't have any time frame yet of when it will open. So it's not a question at this point, though. It's not a question of if; it's a question of when.
I'll go hunt down the link to the blog article about the lookup service. It was a very good article explaining exactly, kind of what the parameters are we would expect. So I'll punch that into the chat here in a minute.
Okay. All right. So
hey,
go ahead.
Just another couple of thoughts as far as other resources to consider. I don't think you mentioned county histories, but county histories published in the late 1800s, early 1900s often had, biographical sketches and other write-ups that can be helpful for identifying a hometown, place of origin. If they lived later in the 20th century and qualified and applied for Social Security, your Social Security applications, the SS5 form might be worth requesting, would contain place of birth as well. So a couple other thoughts.
Also, too, if you're not finding, and this is just something that popped in my head, if you're not finding some of these records online, maybe through Ancestry, FamilySearch, maybe just general online through Google or whatever, make sure you check with your local genealogical societies and historical societies, because they may have additional records as well that can help with some of your research. Okay, anybody else on that one? All right, so another question here, finding a transcription of a will. This one particular will came out of New York in 1718. It was proved in 1718. Where can you go to obtain the copy of the original will? You have the transcription, excuse me, but where is the original will? And we're going to let, let's see, who have I picked on here? Let's see here. Beth.
I mean, that's such a good question, though. You know, you find those transcripts, you do want to get the originals. New York itself is kind of an unusual state when it comes to probate records, simply because most states let the county courts take care of it, but New York assigns a surrogate's court, who happens to be a county level court, to take care of it. But prior to 1783, most wills were probated in Albany as part of the as the kind of central location for. So the original actual wills, if they exist, are going to be held by the New York State Archives. However, FamilySearch may have indexed or filmed those wills. I did find a catalog entry for wills that look like they cover that time period. Without a name, I can't really look it up, but you might want to take a look at this collection if you are looking for a will for that time period. So pre-1783, I think it is, that those wills are all state level records in New York. So I'd start by looking at the catalog. If you can't get it, or at the Family History Library catalog, if you can't get it there, I'd contact the New York State Archives.
Yeah, and it's always important too, whether it's a transcription or an extract, you always want to try to look at the original. Always want to try to look at the original will, because a transcript and extract may not, particularly a transcript, may not have all of the important information. You know, that they're putting in a transcript, they're basically putting what they think is important, who's ever doing the transcript. And so you always want to look at the original will if you possibly can, in order to see what other information is on there that could be important to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also note that if you are looking for wills for your ancestors, whatever state they happen to be in, make sure that you're doing a search in the Family History Library catalog on both a county level and on a state level, because sometimes they get moved up to a state, or sent, especially early ones will get consolidated and put in a state archives as opposed to on the county level. But so do searches at both levels. And also, if the Family History Library doesn't have it and you're reaching out to archives, make sure you're contacting county archives as well as state archives, because you just don't know who exactly ended up with those original records.
Sometimes the courthouse, if you're contacting the courthouse, they know where the originals have gone to if they're not there in the county. So they can be a resource for finding another location.
Or in addition, you might even contact the local genealogy or historical society. Mm-hmm. Some county courthouses are so helpful, but some of them are very overworked and they're less likely to talk to you, in which case find the local genealogist. They might know where all the records have ended up.
I've gotten good friendly help from small counties, and they seem to maybe have a little more time to help out. Larger counties, they're just too busy.
Cook County, New York County. Yeah, it's true.
I think also too, realize that some of these counties now, if you're not finding the will, if you know there is a will, or even if there's not just a will, but even a probate record, I should say. If FamilySearch doesn't have it, if Ancestry doesn't have it, and you have to go to the county to check to see if these wills are available, it's a good idea to call ahead of time, because some of these counties now are sending their older records to offsite storage facilities. So contact the county ahead of time to make sure that they have their older probate, even land records or whatever, there at the courthouse itself. Because if they don't, then they'll have to bring the record in for you from the offsite storage facility. And they will usually charge you to have that record brought in. And then charge you for copies too. So there you go. All right, we've got number 9 question coming up here. This one is from Quebec. So Jacqueline, put on your thinking cap. And here's the question. Where can one find birth records for children of a family migrating from Quebec to Ontario pre-1850? So prior to 1850, where can you find birth records for children of a family that's migrating from Quebec to Ontario?
So I'd say the first step in that is to not go straight into the birth records, but rather find out which children were born in which province and during which time period, because that will, sway what records you have to look at. So, even if it is pre-1850 that the births happened, go looking into those censuses starting in the 1841s and 1851, so on and so forth, and see what province they are listing as their place of birth. And then you kind of want to look for records to locate them as they're migrating. So like in Ontario, we actually have tax assessment records starting in like 1843. So if the birth happened around that time and they're in Ontario, that could be a good way to locate them outside of census records and find out, okay, where were they living? Which district or which county were they living at this time? And then from that point, then you can start looking into those birth records. So if they were born in Quebec, obviously first stop is your Duran collection for all those different church records. And in Ontario, you're going to also be looking in church records since civil registration didn't begin until around 1869. So look in those census records, or even in those tax assessment records I was talking about, they actually list their religious denomination in both of them. So if you look at both of those and find out which churches you should be looking at, and then you can, contact local genealogical societies to see maybe a listing of churches in the area, or looking on the FamilySearch catalog to see if we have church records for the area as well. The LAC also has some different church records on their website that you can look at. That's where I would go to do those.
I know here in the US, for example, a lot of times I find where, and during this time period and even later, where a family sometimes will wait for a specific time period and then take all their children all at one time to get baptized. And so does that happen in Canada also?
Yeah, I think that's a universal kind of concept as well. So that's a good point to bring up. You might also even, if you find their later marriage record for the children, those might also have some birth records. And if you also find like a church marriage record for them, sometimes they also will list baptismal dates next to their church record to prove that they were, a regular member of the church and that they had the, not authority, but the allowance to be married by the church. They were in good standings with the church at that time. Also looking at newspaper records, those could be a good source for you as well. Oh, and yeah, it's the LAC, Libraries and Archives Canada.
Yeah, we got a chat on that. So I was going to ask that, but Beth answered it.
Good.
Way to go, Beth.
Woo.
Jason, make sure she gets the rest of the day off. Okay. Good. All right, let's move on to the next one here. How do I determine? This is a good question. Well, they're all good questions. That was dumb of me to say. They're all good questions. How do I determine the parents of someone who was born before 1850 and whose parents are from Delaware? So it sounds in this case that probably located this person on a census record, probably 1880, I'm going to assume. And it said on the census record, on the 1880 census record, that the parents were born in Delaware. And so how would you determine who their parents are? And well, this is Delaware. I should have taken this one, but we're going to let Julia answer it.
Well, you can step in, Tim, if I make a mistake. Anytime you're searching for someone who was born before 1850, you still want to check all of the census records for their lifetime. And that will give you a lot of information about where they came from and where they migrated throughout their lives, and it can help you find other records. Obviously, death and burial records would be important many times on the death certificates if they lived until up to the time when death certificates were created. It could list the names of parents, but also burial records are important. Even before vital records were generally kept, churches would keep track of burials. So church records are important. There may be cemetery records in certain locations. You just want to really search the library catalog and also local records for those indications that they were buried and died. Newspaper obituaries are also really helpful. Not only does it tell when the person died, but it can give biographical information and explain who the surviving children and spouses were, as well as names of parents and where an individual came from. Marriage records may also give names of parents, not always, but in many cases, those records listed who the mother and father were of the bride and groom. Even the early records, if someone married prior to the age of majority or before they were considered a legal adult, they may have had to get permission from the parents to marry. And in that case, there would be a special affidavit or a paper or letter that they wrote saying, yes, I'm the father of this young lady and I give her permission to marry. And so you always want to check those records. Another source that you can look at for parents is military records. Those didn't list parents' names as often, but if an individual passed away before they married and had children, the parents could have been the recipients of a pension or other information. So those military records can give you information to at least find where they were from and what their family structure was like. The land records can also be very helpful. Many times individuals purchased land next to their parents or lived on the same property and until they were able to buy their own land. In cases of inheritance, those land pieces of land would have been transferred to the heirs, which they would have to show that there was some kind of relationship there. I found some land records in Kentucky that specified who all the heirs were in the family, as well as their spouses and maiden names of the women. And so those land records can be very valuable. You don't want to miss those. It can also be helpful to create a timeline of the person's life and watch where they have migrated. And so if you can get back to the earliest time when the parents may have been living, that can help you identify people with the same surname living in the same area. And if you can do targeted research of maybe perhaps find some potential parents of the individual, you can look for probate records of those potential parents and see if they list the names of the children. Also, the siblings are very important because in a family, all the siblings generally have the same parents. And so you may not be able to find records on your particular ancestor and who their parents were. But if you know that ancestor's siblings, you can do research on them, and there may be records where they have actually listed the names of their parents. And so you always want to research the siblings too. So those are some steps that I would take to find parents of someone who was born before 1850. Does anyone else have some ideas?
Yeah, one technique that I like to use, particularly if it's an uncommon name, and Delaware, it's kind of a small state. It only has 3 counties in it. So, but one technique that I like to use, as I said, particularly if it's an uncommon name, is, for example, we don't know when this child was born. So, if they were born, say, in 1825 or whatever, and their last name is Janowski, that's an uncommon name. born in 1825, I would look at the 1830 census, federal census for Delaware, and see how many Janopsky families are living there in 1830, and then see how many of those Janopsky families have a child around that age of 5, under that particular age. So you wouldn't get the names of both parents, but you would get the name of the head of household, at least in the 1830 census for that Janopsky individual. And then you could search later censuses for that family, or even probate records for that individual. So that's one technique that I suggest people use too in locating some of these parents.
Yeah, that really narrows down your search so that you don't spend so much time chasing things that aren't going to be productive.
Especially if their surname's Janopsky. So if it's Smith or Jones or Miller, you don't want to be looking for a Miller family in Lancaster County in 1850. So it's a good technique if it's an uncommon name.
I've had an
Jacqueline,
experience.
Go ahead.
Jacqueline mentioned in the chat that it's a good idea to also look at newspaper records, because there might have been a marriage notice that could list the marriage date and the person who married them. And in that case, it would lead you to the church records, and those may list the parents' names.
I had an experience in using land records and paying attention to the witnesses that were signing the deeds. And I knew a couple of the children, and in their deeds, they just had these same names. So I investigated those same names, and I ended up finding a whole family, and they were mostly girls. So they all had different last names, but these men who were signing each other's deeds, it kind of triangulated, and I could figure out, well, this one signed this one, who signed this one, and they were all the son-in-laws. So able to find who the parents were because I had all those siblings. And the parents were actually giving some of the land to to their children. And one of the deeds actually said, when one brother-in-law was selling to the other, said, except for the 1 acre on this particular area that is reserved for my parents, and named them and in their older age to live on. So he was providing that one part for the parents, and it actually named them and stated the relationship. You don't always get that definitive statement that so-and-so is the parent or child of so-and-so, and you have to kind of infer it. But in my process of inferring things, I found that statement. So pay attention to the witnesses in your probates and your land records, because often they are relatives.
Yep. Now, when you get go ahead. Go ahead, Jay.
I was going to say, to build upon kind of what you said, Tim, and what Lynn said, especially if you've got you're looking at surnames in Delaware and you've got common surnames, just thinking about those naming patterns. What did this individual name her children? Look at those names. They may have been family names. So you may be able to look for the names of the children with that surname, and maybe narrow down your list of candidates in Delaware, hoping that a family name's been used. And maybe that's a place to at least start to begin ruling out potential families.
And this may not be a fast process. It may take a while for you to gather all these records and look at them thoroughly. They say it takes 5 times reading a document before you really get everything out of it. And I have found that one reading definitely is not enough. So take your time, do a thorough job, keep good notes.
Good. I think we have time for one more question here, and we're going to jump back to Canada. So we're probably going to be going to Jacqueline at this point. Boy, we've used Jacqueline a lot today. Jacqueline will be doing her own podcast later. And she gets 10%. Okay, let's see here. How do I determine a town of birth? Oh boy, this is a tough one. How do I determine a town of birth for someone from Ireland who settled in Ontario before 1850? How does one determine a town of birth for someone from Ireland who settled in Ontario before 1850?
Well, I wonder. So one thing to be aware of is that there's a really good chance that you're going to have no immigration records at this time period. So kind of rule that out. But I mean, if you would like to check some immigration records, the Philby records that we've been talking about, you can search through Ancestor or through the books that we have in the library. That would be my first stop for those. But again, there's very small chance you'll find immigration records in Canada before that time period. Naturalization records, especially if they're coming from Ireland, they're considered from Great Britain. You know, they did not have to naturalize. That didn't end until like about 1947. So it's tough luck there. I would suggest my first record to look at would be land records in Ontario. Like we've been talking before, you could see it as a theme of when you immigrated, you buy land. That's your first stop. You need a place to live with your family. So those are going to be some of the first records that you find with them in Canada. And oftentimes they'll say where they came from. So that could give you a town of birth. It could just give you Ireland, but you know, there's always a good chance of something there. Along with that, I would also look at others who lived around them. There could be other immigrants that came from the same area. So even if you've been looking on your person for a long time and not finding any place in Ireland, check those people that they initially immigrated by. And they could have records that your ancestor might not have. And that could give you a good track to get back to Ireland. Another thing to look at are church records. I know traditionally in Canada, over 60% of Irish immigrants were actually Protestant. So those are the church records that you want to start with, and then move forward from there. And those have a good chance of having a hometown. But those land and church records, especially before 1850, would be my first stop for you.
Okay. Anybody else want to join in on that? Do you notice when we ask the Canadian questions and I say, does anybody else want to join in? No one ever does. I don't. So confident about their Canadian research.
I appreciate it.
All right. Unfortunately, the hour has passed rather rapidly. We were able to answer quite a number of questions, though. One individual over on the chat is asking if they can submit questions to specific individuals. We would ask you that you sign up for an online consultation, and there you go. And Jacqueline has just posted that link to that for an online consultation. If you specify Canada, you'll probably get Jacqueline or Rachel, or one of our Canadian people. So you can submit your question that way. So we'd like to thank everybody for your questions, for letting us answer them. That's one of the things I miss about the library is being there amongst the patrons and being able to assist with questions. So it's good to get out there and be able to answer some of these questions for individuals again. So we thank you very, very much for those questions that you have submitted. This class was live streamed on YouTube and will be available as soon as the class ends. However, that recording will only be available for a limited time. Again, if you need help with a specific research problem, please sign up for a virtual consultation.
Can I just jump in here really quickly, Tim?
Sure.
I also wanted to let people know we are doing another Q&A in September, I think is our next scheduled Q&A, but we put the link to submitting questions for that Q&A if you want to go ahead and get the questions out there, and we'll add them to our list for next time. So just go ahead and feel free to submit them, but our next Q&A should be in September, I believe.
Yeah, good, okay. But yes, always remember that you do have that option to sign up for a virtual consultation. I only had one last week and I haven't had anybody sign up this week, so I'm feeling kind of lonely out there and unloved and unwanted. So please sign up for those consultations. Our next class, which will be taught by the U.S.-Canada team, will be Forgotten Wives, Mothers, and Old Maids, Tracing Women in U.S. Research. And that class is going to be held next week on the 3rd of June. Boy, can you believe it's June already? At 10 a.m., that's Mountain Daylight Time, or I think it's what, -7 Greenwich Mean Time, Beth? I think that's what it is. And that is the next class for U.S. and Canada, the Forgotten Wives, Mothers, and Old Maids, next Thursday on June the 3rd. The next class, which will be given by FamilySearch, is the research process, research help, and searching records on the family tree. And that class will be given on June the 1st. That's next week also, again at 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. So again, we thank everybody for joining us. Thank you to our panel. Everybody wave goodbye. And all of you, we all look forward to seeing you in one of our other classes. So thank you all, and everybody stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.